Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation from the archives. So this is audio only with Kitty Edwards, who was at the time of our conversation the CEO of the Living and Dying Consciously Project. You'll find this an interesting interview. We talk about creating sacred space for the dying. But because it's an older interview, just as a disclaimer, some of the links or websites or workshops mentioned in the interview may not be ongoing at this time. So you'll still find the interview of value, but I just wanted to tell you if you're searching for an event that we talk about in the interview that has probably already taken place and is not available at this time. So make sure you subscribe to this channel and to the podcast wherever you happen to listen, and leave a rating and review. Go to eoluniversity.com/support if you're willing and able to make a small contribution to keep this channel and the podcast on the air. So we'll move on to that audio interview with Kitty Edwards right now. Today I'll be interviewing Kitty Edwards. Kitty helps individuals on their journey to death to find the courage to release their fears. She is the executive director of the Living and Dying Consciously Project, a nonprofit organization that is building a community of teachers who help individuals live consciously through all of life's passages with the knowledge that death is inevitable. Kitty is a shamanic practitioner, public speaker, published author, and master teacher. She has trained with medicine men and women in Southeast Asia, North and South America. She is a graduate of Core Shamanism, designed by Sandra Ingerman, and the master's program of the Light Body School of the Four Winds Society, founded by Alberto Villoldo. She is the co-founder and serves on the board of directors of Conversations on Death in her hometown of Boulder, Colorado. Kitty's passion is to help people explore ways to consciously engage in the dying process, celebrate the accomplishment of navigating the journey to death, and have a greater sense of their own journey to come. Kitty, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hi, Karen. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to you about the work that you've been doing, which seems very cutting edge and very much needed at this time in our society.
Oh, well, it's interesting that you say cutting edge because while the concepts seem new to many people, many of the concepts we work with are quite ancient.
Which is interesting because I think that cutting edge is that we're bringing back what was discarded in the past, that we've suddenly realized is important. We've suddenly realized we need to reinvigorate ancient traditions and wisdom in order to embrace living and dying more fully.
It certainly helps from my experience. I've certainly worked with many people who don't have a spiritual tradition to fall back on in times of crisis, and these ancient ways sort of open up a new perception of how people can live a fuller, more conscious life. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting.
Yes, it really is. And Kitty, I was hoping at the start of our conversation here, you'd just tell us a little bit more about your own journey and how you came to do this work.
Well, I've been sitting with the dying since I was 6 years old, and I didn't think that was unusual until my brother said to me when I was 35, 36 years old, "Why is it that everyone you know is dying?" And I was sort of stunned by the question, and I asked him, "Well, why don't you know people who are dying?" I thought he was the strange one. It just seemed like I was very comfortable with people who were terminally ill, and for some reason was called to sit and talk and visit. And then I was a teacher at Boulder High School and worked with a young man who suffered from muscular dystrophy. And he taught me so much about living life fully in the face of disability and death that I think a lot of my opening to death and living life, being aware of death, really came from him. But later, I was in Borneo on a research trip, and I worked with a shaman, or they're not called shamans, they're particularly a medicine man from the Iban tribe, and he introduced me to altered states of consciousness. Now, this was so peculiar for me because I was a pretty academic person, that when I came home, I began to study in shamanic programs such as Sandra Ingerman's or Alberto Violdo's program, to learn things like journeying and soul retrievals and extractions and so forth. And that led me further into working in a program called Dying Consciously that comes out of Peru and Bolivia. And here, these are the medicine men and women of South America teaching us in ceremony how to engage with our life more deeply. So it's been a journey.
Oh, it definitely sounds like it. So you've kind of come through your own life experience and then gone deeper and deeper into your explorations to help you make sense of everything that you've witnessed and seen in life, and now are applying it to help other people.
Yes, it's sort of like developing your little bag of tricks so that when you're engaged with people who are truly suffering with terminal illness, then you can bring something new to their life, new perception, a new way of perceiving things that's not complicated. It's usually quite simple.
And so you mentioned shamanism, and I wondered if for some of our listeners might not be familiar with the term shamanism, if you would just define that a little bit more.
Sure. The actual term shaman comes from Siberia. That's the term they use for their medicine men and women. But now it's generically used in the West to apply to any medicine man or woman from an indigenous culture. And now people who are more removed from their own indigenous culture, like myself, have gone back to study with medicine men and women, or people who are called shamans generically, to learn about their ceremonies, to learn about their perceptions about the world, to learn about their techniques, which are often called energy medicine, to help the suffering clear their energy fields and feel better and find courage and find excitement or mystery in the world around them. So a shamanic practitioner is someone who has trained with indigenous men and women who practice a very ancient form of medicine.
And you mentioned that the mission of the Living and Dying Consciously project is to bring this ancient wisdom to the modern world by teaching some of the rituals that you've learned from your teachers. And I was wondering if you could share more about that. Tell us about some of the rituals that you have found that are helpful to those of us in the modern world.
Well, one of them is to learn to create sacred space around yourself and your loved ones. And sacred space can be created in any way you wish to create it, but it's usually based on your own belief system or what nourishes you. An example might be that indigenous people look around them at the natural world and call in the energies of the natural world, the mountains, the oceans, the rivers, the trees, the desert, the animals, the plants, and they surround themselves with this energy, and this forms the sacred space that one can reside in. And according to indigenous cultures, when you create this sacred space, anything is possible. Anything can happen.
I love that idea. And I was thinking, you and I both live in Colorado, where we're surrounded by the beauties of nature. It's right at hand for us. Do you have thoughts of how someone who lives in an urban area might create sacred space?
Well, in an urban area, you think of the energies around you. Of course, if you're in a large city, there's a vibration of the life that's being led. There's a vibration that comes from the urban life that you can call on. But even in an urban space, you can look up at the sun and call on the sun, and you can look down at the earth through a tree, possibly in a park, or through a crack in the sidewalk, and feel the earth below you that is stable and is supporting you. So right there you have something from above and something from below, and the vibrations all around you. It may be the steel of the buildings, or the stability of the concrete, or it might be the energy of the electricity flowing through the currents, delivering lights to all the buildings in an urban setting. So it doesn't have to be the natural world like we have it here in Colorado. I'll give you another example. I worked with a scientist once, and of course he was very pragmatic, and he believed only what you see is what you get. And so we created with him a way to call in sacred space by calling in the elements of the periodic table. So for him, we called in carbon and oxygen for the air we breathe, and hydrogen, which bonds with oxygen to bring in the waters, and nitrogen came in on a lightning bolt, and then silicon below us held us like sand, shifting sands, and then we asked for helium to connect us to the stars. And the scientist just loved this, because this is the way he perceived the world, through the elements, and it made sense to him. So it really depends on who you are, where you live, and how you perceive the world as to how you call in the sacred space.
I love that. I love that example of how to start with where you are, and whatever lens you're using to view the world is what you use for viewing your own sacred space.
Right, and of course someone with a spiritual tradition might call on spirit guides, angels, even God, to come and shape that sacred space that is so special. And it's very important when you're working with people who are dying to create that space of peace and gentleness and tranquility. And it can be done by anyone. You don't need someone from outside to create that for you.
Yes, I wanted to ask you if you have any specific suggestions for those of us who work with the dying about how to go about creating a sacred space.
Well, first of all, if you know the person you're working with, you can ask them what the energies are that are important to them. What kind of special energies would support them in this time of possible fear or trepidation, and you can have that discussion. However, oftentimes in situations you don't get to have that conversation, so you can open sacred space in your own tradition, in your own perception of the world, and hold someone in your sacred space if you wish. So it can happen either from the person or from yourself.
And I love the concept of holding space. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what that means, because I've heard some of my friends who have been grieving have said that what meant the most to them is when others said to them, "I am holding space for you." And I wondered if you could elaborate on that concept.
Well, the way we teach it in our classes, and I've been taught by my teachers, is that it's like creating an octahedron. So you call in from the four directions, the west, the north, the east, the south. You call in some energy from each of the four directions. Then you call in something from below. It could be the earth, or it could be the darkness. It could be the roots of the trees, something from below that will stabilize that octahedron. And then you turn your vision to above and call in some energy from above that might be the sun or the moon or the stars, or for a spiritual guide from above. And then you've created this octahedron space that you reside within, and you can also invite other people into this sacred space. So you've actually created an envelope around yourself and the person you're working with. And they do notice it, because with your intention, you have shifted the energy between yourself and the person you're holding space for.
Oh, that's a beautiful concept. I like the vision of that, and it reminded me of this is just a little aside, a little story. One time I was attending a death cafe that we were actually holding in a horse barn, of all places, but there were 2 horses in the barn. And during the death cafe, one of the participants started to cry as she was talking about her father's illness. And one of the horses from across the barn perked up and walked over and stood behind her. And I had this clear image of the horse actually holding space for her, the horse standing behind her as if, I'm here, I'm helping to create a container for you where you are safe. And it was really a powerful moment. And to think that even animals can participate in that sacred space with us.
Absolutely. That's lovely. That's lovely.
Well, when we're working with the dying and working to create this sacred space, do you find it's helpful to use music or aromatherapy, any other adjuncts to help us in that process?
Oh, sure. Of course, you have to be a little careful with aromatherapy because of allergies, but anything that awakens the senses, whether it be soft music or sound or aroma or touch, gentle touch, like comfort touch massage, is very important with the dying, because we're getting down to our elemental self, and it's our senses that is experiencing the world around us. So if we can engage with people as they're dying through a sensual process, it's really quite wonderful. But oftentimes people who are in a critical situation, touching and using sensual elements is not appropriate. So that's why we resort back to sacred space, because it's an energetic, like the horse created, it's an energetic that doesn't require anything extra except for your intention.
Mm-hmm. And I'm imagining in a critical situation, as you described, perhaps in an ICU or where a person is dying and there's kind of a hectic energy in that space, right, of people rushing back and forth and machines and beeping sounds, that it would be so important to create sacred space in particular in that type of a dying situation, but there are some obstacles there.
Absolutely, and especially those energetic obstacles of the machines beeping and all the activity going on. So if a family or friends of the person who's in this situation can hold sacred space for them in some way, or even have the notion that they can do that for someone by calling in the cardinal directions and an element from below and an element from above, it makes them more engaged in the process of dying.
Mm-hmm. So it's
which
very
is hard to be in a hospital, It's
yes.
hard to be engaged in a hospital. So.
And so regardless of the setting, it's very important to bring in the family members who are present and engage them also in this process of creating sacred space.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, what we like to teach is that you don't need an outsider like a shamanic practitioner coming in at this kind of critical time. If the family knows how or has some tools to open sacred space or do a ceremony, that this is much more important than having someone from the outside. Mm-hmm. So it's really creating an awareness that there are possibilities.
So it would really be important for family members to have some training and awareness, as you have said, in advance of that dying time, so that they have resources they can fall back on when they get to the critical moments and they need those tools to to utilize.
Absolutely. And of course, Karen, that in our lifestyles it's not always possible to get training ahead of time. But even if they can call on someone who can train them quickly in some easy techniques, and those are the techniques that we teach a lot in the workshops that we teach, like holding sacred space or doing a simple energy process to clear a person's energy field, or working on giving permission to someone to die is an energetic ceremony or ritual that a family can engage in, which actually happens very naturally in the dying process as a family is coming to witness the death and realizing that it's now time to let go.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, about giving permission to die and how you help families do that.
Well, giving permission to die is something that we need to practice daily in our lives because we really don't know when death might come about. So it's a question of when we teach it in a workshop, we ask people, what would you want to hear from your loved ones to know that they're giving you permission to die? They're giving you permission to go. And oftentimes these are quite specific instructions that people want to hear, like I want to know that my children will be okay, or I want to know that my pets will be cared for, or I want to know that I did a good job, or I want to know that I was loved. And even though they're specific to the person, when you listen to hundreds of people give themselves permission to die, you realize they're universal issues of being loved, knowing that those you leave behind are taken care of. So one of my favorite workshops to teach is with a group of doctors and asking them to give themselves permission to die, which is very difficult for a doctor. But then they discover some of the basic things that they would be concerned about that, and in practice, they learn what they need to say to their patients at that critical time, or to their loved ones and their family members. So but we do it in sacred space, and we do it with great consciousness of what we would want to hear, so that we're aware at the time when our friends and family members are dying, how we can be compassionate and allow them and give them permission to die.
I love that you're teaching it to doctors, because it occurs to me that oftentimes doctors do the opposite, do not give patients permission to die, that doctors have their own attachment to patients living and surviving and overcoming their disease, and they may send patients away with some sort of expectations from the doctor or energy from the doctor that says, please don't die because then I will be a failure. And
well, failure, of course, is what many doctors fear, because that's what they're trained, is to save lives. So fighting that energy of failure is quite difficult. But if we work on the personal level, if we take the doctor out of the hospital and say, what would you need to know you had permission to die, we don't really need to take it to the next step for them. We just need to allow them to open up to the concept that, yes, they will die. And if they understand that, which, psychologically we understand it, mentally we understand it, but emotionally, that's a whole different thing.
Yes.
So doing it on the personal level, and then, as I said, practicing it on a daily. When you get up in the morning and go, this is a beautiful day. It would be a good day to die. And what would I need to make that a good day to die? Not that you're calling in death, not that you want to die. It's just that it makes your life wake up, and you realize that this really will be a wonderful day to live.
Absolutely. I'm struck with a memory when my father-in-law was dying. My husband and I went to be with him at his bedside, and my husband's sister kept saying, "Don't die, Daddy," to him. And I was asking her, why she felt a need to say that. And she said, I don't want him to think that I want him to go. And I said, but you're energetically holding him and making it more difficult for him to go, because he feels conflicted now and feels that if you're saying don't die, that it's not okay for him to go and he shouldn't leave, and now he's torn between the two worlds. That's at least how I perceived it. But I came to realize that that's actually fairly common. People think it's more loving to say I don't want you to die than it is to say I give you permission to die.
And also, Karen, in some cultures, it is appropriate to hang on. It is important for the person who is dying that people sit around them and grieve very loudly and beg them to stay and beg them to stay. So this concept of giving permission to die is not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
However, with the shamans I have trained with, and it was felt to be very important. So your sister-in-law, that was her needs, and it might have not hastened your husband's father's death, or slowed it down. But oftentimes when we're grieving, it's about what our needs are.
Mm-hmm.
We need that person to stay for us. And, I think that's okay too. We all approach death very personally.
That's very true, and it's all a balance of the needs of each person involved, and we figure our way around that at times. I guess.
We
how
do.
How to bring our needs and our energies together, and how we get through it and move on to the next step.
Yes, and working with a lot of hospice staff, of course you hear many stories about people who are not willing to let go, and how oftentimes the people who are dying linger much longer than anyone expected, waiting for that person to come to terms and let go. So, it's important, and certainly in our culture we see it more often that people do hold back and prevent people from dying. So, but that's all energy, that's energy exchange, and that's what shamanic practitioners, the area they work in is that energy exchange. Is there unfinished business, for example, with someone? And does that unfinished business need to be expressed in some way? And oftentimes at the end of life, it's not a time to sit down and have a conversation. So that unfinished business can be expressed through a simple ceremony of possibly, if it's not in a hospital, lighting a candle and blowing it out, having prayers around the person, or maybe for a forgiveness circle, asking for forgiveness from the person who's dying. So there are different ceremonies that one can step into to take care of that unfinished business.
Mm-hmm. And I know you also mentioned clearing the energy field, which it seems like is part of that process as well.
Right. Shamanic practitioners and indigenous medicine men and women see the world through energy. All living things have an energy field around them or it, so that trees would have an energy field, and people, animals, even stones or rivers or oceans have an energy field around them, and you can engage your energy field with some other energy field and receive information and make a connection. So, in fact, at the energetic level, this is how we perceive the world. Oftentimes, when people get too close to us, or if we feel threatened in some way in a large crowded area like an airport, maybe it's uncomfortable as compared to having more spaciousness out in nature. So these energy fields that surround us, we can clear them, and we can teach people everybody to how to clear their own energy field and how to clear the energy field of another, especially at a time when someone is dying. And this tends to relieve tension. It relaxes the muscles. It decreases pain oftentimes, and also can build that connection, a clearer connection between the dying and their loved ones. But it's a ritual technique, and but it can be taught to anyone.
And I noticed that is one of the rituals that you'll be teaching in your workshop at the Afterlife Awareness Conference.
Oh, yes, we will be teaching that. We'll teach people how to simply clear their own energy fields and to do that for another. Our workshops are always very experiential. So there's a little bit of talk, but then there's a lot of experiencing.
Which is perfect, because that's the only way you can really learn these rituals is through the actual experience of it yourself.
Oh, I think so, yes. And then you can take them and teach them to your friends and family. Mm-hmm. That's what we hope.
Well, yes, and I was going to say, one of the things I experience as a hospice doctor, sitting with families when someone is dying, is that dying is a very sacred process, and it seems that even people who've never had a spiritual belief before somehow recognize that and have a longing for the sacred at that time. But as a society, we're so lacking. We're lacking in rituals. We haven't been taught how to create our own rituals, or how to create the sacred space that you're describing. So I found just on many occasions there was a hunger for it, and yet no one in the room who actually knew what to do about it, which was very sad.
True. And I think this is one of the things that's important to do now, is to start creating your end-of-life community, so that you do get the support through ritual or through discussion or through music, so that your community knows how to support you, and also you'll know more how to support members of your community in times of stress or death. So building a community is really important.
Mm-hmm. And so the rituals that you are teaching to people, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be working in the end-of-life arena to utilize those for other people. These are rituals we each need for our own lives, regardless of the work we're doing. These are very important for us as we move forward in life.
Well, sure. Just like clearing your energy field is a wonderful thing, and most shamanic practitioners have some kind of practice every morning. It's sort of like natural hygiene, like brushing your teeth. You clean your energy field so that you're fresh for the day and you're ready to receive and give out whatever energies you have to give. So that would be important. Creating sacred space is something you can use just for your quiet time or meditation or sitting in nature, so that you create a space that you can sort of step away from your normal busy lives and find that core, that peace, and that mystery and those miracles without having a spiritual practice per se, but they're good practices to institute in your everyday life.
Yes, and so these are practices that help us live consciously, but can be very useful to us at the end of life as well. We can call upon those same practices to utilize when there's a need for them at the end.
That's right. That works very well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about your the workshop that you're teaching. It's called Death as a Rite of Passage, and I was wondering if you would describe a little bit more about it. Tell us what you mean by death as a rite of passage.
Well, first of all, a rite of passage is, we're all familiar with rites of passages, such as a wedding is a rite of passage, where you move from one stage in your life, one role in your life, to a new role with new responsibilities usually. A graduation would be a rite of passage. And in our culture, we're really very good at practicing the new beginnings, like a new couple, or a new adventure or a new home possibly, but we're not very good at celebrating the endings. And so this death as a rite of passage, celebrating death or preparing for death as a rite of passage is important because you have to realize that you're going to be releasing your old role and you're going to cross through a threshold to possibly a new role if you have that belief, or just crossing the threshold into the unknown if you don't have a spiritual belief. So it's very important to create activities and preparations and community around this rite of passage that we're all going to go through. And in our workshop, we're going to look at preparations for this rite of passage, death, and 3 different levels. And we'll look at them from the literal level, the really hands-on, what paperwork you need, what doctor you need to choose, what medical agent you need to choose. That would be the literal level. And then we're going to step it up to the mythic level where you learn to tell your stories and find your own mythic journey. You begin to discover or remember who your heroes are or who are the pirates in your life. Maybe you were the pirate in your own life. And also to begin to celebrate your life now, instead of waiting for people after you die to celebrate you, to bring those stories together, to find purpose in your own life and have a life review of sorts. And we teach life review in many different ways that people can engage with it. So that's the literal level and the mythic level. And then we will teach rituals at the energetic level that people can step into to release themselves from this life or from this situation and step into a new situation. Another energetic process is opening sacred space, for example. So again, death as a rite of practice does take preparation. And we have all kinds of different experiences in this workshop to help people prepare for this rite of passage.
So it sounds like those who attend this workshop will be taking home with them a toolkit full of different practices that they can utilize and maybe pick and choose what fits them or works best for them in their daily lives, but have resources available for the future too when new situations arise.
Oh, yes. And, it's just going to be the toolkit that we can teach in from 9 to 5 that day. But there are many more tools, but this will open one's imagination to create new tools because that's part of the process, to engage in it so that you can make these rituals very personal for your life and for your friends and for your loved ones. We have to step through these rites of passages as we maybe have an illness or change our home or go through a divorce or become an empty nester. That these are all rites of passage.
That's really beautiful.
I'll be talking about the founder of the No Regrets Project, Patty Panza, who had metastasized breast cancer. In the last 6 months of her life, she was very curious about how to get to the end of your life without having any regrets. So she talked to her friends, she did a lot of writing and testing things out, and she came up with 5 practices that we can all do in our lives that will get you to the end of your life without regrets. And these practices are: be grateful every day, trust, take a risk, have the courage to be yourself, always choose joy, and love myself and share it. That's sort of like putting on your own oxygen mask before you share it. Especially this is a good one for caretakers who extend themselves so far that it's very hard to support themselves. So, and certainly Patty found this at the end of her life, that she had less and less energy to give to her friends, even though she wanted to, that it was important for her to love herself first, take care of herself, and then share what she could.
I know. I'm glad that you mentioned caregivers, because I've been doing a lot of groups recently with caregivers and hearing from them how exhausted they are, but how guilty they feel at the same time, because they don't have unlimited energy. And so it's such a good reminder that we need to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of anyone else.
Oh, absolutely. And people who are dying have the same challenges, because they want to care for their friends and their loved ones, and yet they're ill and uncomfortable and suffering themselves. And it's so hard in our culture to say, look, I'm dying. This is what I need right now. So yes, it's a huge problem for the caregivers, but it's also a problem for the dying. Mm-hmm. And it's also a problem for each of us who are living, who tend to be empathetic and wanting to help other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I found that as well with hospice workers in my practice, that many of us tend to be caretakers who are focus ourselves on giving to other people, but are not good at all at receiving and seeking out what it is we need for ourselves. And it's wonderful to have that reminder. So it's just been delightful to talk to you and learn from you, Kitty.
Well, thank you, Karen, for inviting me. This has been fun.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kitty Edwards. Be sure and tune in. Next time, I'll be back with more interesting interviews for you here on End of Life University. Bye-bye.